Well, welcome everybody. It's nice to see you again. Thanks for coming. Welcome to FileMaker Group Therapy session number 2, Building Healthy Relationships. In today's session, we're going to look at, first of all, simple relationships, the one-to-many kind, where the primary key value matches the foreign key value, and the foreign key field, we remember, belongs in the many table in those kinds of relationships. We're also going to look at some uncommon relationships like self-joins and cross-product, or otherwise known as Cartesian joins. And then next we'll look at some complex relationships like multi-predicate joins and filtered value lists. I've got more to get through than I wished that I had, but I just couldn't leave some of these things out, and I still want to leave plenty of time for your questions and our group therapy at the end. So I'm going to hit the ground running here. First, here's the ERD that we designed for the animal care clinic in our first session. I know it looks a little bit busy, but we'll be tackling just a couple of portions of it in this session here, focusing on those 3 different categories of relationships. First, some of the simple relationships. We'll focus on just these 4 entities. Let's say we wanted to put a portal on the household layout that showed the customers or household members from that household. Now, if you want to follow along with me, I sent out in the email the link to link to the zip file that has the actual database that I'll be demonstrating in, and I'm going to switch into that database now as well. And it's called Animal Care Begin. I sent you 2 FileMaker files, one that's this beginning file and one that's the completed version, so that you know the beginning from the end. And so if we were in this database and switch into the household layout for the desktop, which, by the way, I've only done very little work on this database to get it into this shape. Simply created all the tables, added the fields, haven't done any real serious work on the relationship graph at all, as you'll see here shortly, and as you open up your own copy. But again, if we're trying to build a portal on this household layout showing all the customers who belong in that household, it's going to be a one-to-many relationship, because any one household might have many people or customers in it, and they each might bring in the same animal that belongs to or in that household. Any questions at this point?
Nope.
Okay, fantastic. So I'll go into layout mode and I'll get the portal tool. For the sake of time, I've already placed some labels in appropriate places, and I'll create this portal. Now, I haven't built the relationship for the portal yet. So we'll say show records from, and you can see that there are no table occurrences on the relationship graph related to the current table household. That current table concept is really important. It tells you your context. It tells you that the current layout is based on the table occurrence on the relationship graph called household. We'll sneak over into the manage database command and jump into the relationships graph. And here are the 2 table occurrences that we want to involve, household and customer. The foreign key is on the many side. I'm just going to drag from ID household to ID in household, which is exactly why I name my primary key fields and my foreign key fields the way I do, because it helps guide me in forming those relationships. And while I'm here, I'll go ahead and double click on the relationship line that was just formed and specify any particulars about that relationship. For example, do I want to be able to add new people into a household, new customers, new household members, if you will, via this relationship just by typing them into the portal? Yes, definitely. Secondly, do I want to delete household members, customer records, if I delete an entire household record? Well, for the sake of referential integrity and avoiding orphaned records, Yes, I'm going to turn that on. There are other ways to handle that, but this cascading delete approach, as it's known, is a very easy way to implement the restriction that says, hey, we're not going to allow orphaned records to exist in our database. And that's a very important rule. Say okay there, and okay again. And that takes us back into the portal setup dialog box, show records from, and now we've got a related table because there's a connection between the household table occurrence and the customer table occurrence on the graph. I'll choose customer. I'll say yes to that and to that, and okay. And let's bring over the first name field and the last name field and drop them into this portal. There we go. Easy enough. Take a look and see if that's working right. And sure enough, for any given household, we see the people in that household. That is those customers who have the same household ID number. Now you're probably noticing, or you will notice, I should say shortly, a little problem, but we'll get there in a second. All right, next one. Let's say that we wanted to show a portal on that same household layout, showing the animals that are members of that household. So here now we're going to connect from household to animal, again using household ID as the primary key on this side, on the one side, and the foreign key on the many side. Back into FileMaker, into layout mode, create the portal. And show records from. I don't have the desired relationship, so we'll jump into the manage database command from here and build it. And here we've got primary key ID in household, and here we've got foreign key ID household in animal. Each animal belongs to a household, not to a customer. That way, if you know, the father, the mother, the eldest sibling wants to bring in that animal into our care clinic, they'll all be tagged as belonging to the same household. The animal belongs to the household, not to an individual member of that family. And so there's our second one-to-many relationship. And again, I'll give it the same treatment as the other. Double-clicking on the relationship line here opens up edit relationship. And on the many side of this relationship, I'll say, yes, I do want to be able to create new animal records in the portal. And I want to delete any animal records if I delete the household record in which those animals live or belong. And okay again. And I'll say, yes, I want to be able to delete portal records. I want to allow vertical scrolling. And we'll bring over, oh, I think I must have fouled that up. I said animal, I thought, but it's looking like it thinks I'm trying to use customer. So let me double click on that again. There, that's what I wanted, animal. And now since I've lost the opportunity to use that nice little dialog box for filling fields, I'll have to come over here and drag the fields in from the field picker. We want the animal name with no label because I've already created the label. There we go. Shorten that up a little bit. And we'll give it a minimal edit box kind of a look. That way it looks more see-through and shows through the background. And I'll option drag that over to the right of itself to put another field that uses the same formatting and size. But that one I'll use the foreign key field for the genus of the animal. And then we'll come over here and say, you know what, let's make that a pop-up menu using a genus value list that I defined earlier before you got here, that just includes all the different types of animals that we deal with: dogs, cats, birds, snakes, and so forth. Okay, so that should work. Any questions or concerns so far? All right, and as I walk through the different household records, we can see the contents of the household members portal is changing, as is the pets or animals portal. So those are your simple relationships. Let's move on into some more unusual relationships, less common. Let's say that we wanted to show fellow customers from the same household. That is, while viewing a customer record, we want to be able to see in a portal all the customers who live in that same household. So from the context of a customer record, we're trying to show in a portal customers. That means that the two sides of the relationship are both going to be the customer table. That qualifies as a self-join, a join between a table and an instance or another instance of the same table. And we'll use the household ID field as the key field because we want to see every person who is also a member of the same household as the current person. I'm going to jump over to the customer desktop layout where we want this portal to land. Go into layout mode, use the portal tool, and draw a little portal. Show records from, nope, we don't have the right relationship. Manage database. And to make a self-join, we're going to have to create another instance of this customer table occurrence. Now, just in case any of you are wondering and freaking out at this point, like, why isn't he using the anchor buoy method to organize his graph? I'm not using any method to organize this graph in today's session because in the session in 2 weeks, the whole session is going to be devoted to graph management strategies, and we'll tear apart the anchor buoy method. We'll also look at the selector connector method, which is a very popular method that's been introduced within the last 6 or 8 years, and see why graph management strategies are necessary, why they're important. So I'm completely kicking that can down the road, deferring that topic to next time. And we'll even start to see in these simple examples how if we have no graph management strategy, it really starts to look like a spider's web, really gets us into the weeds quickly. All right, that said, I want to create the self-join. So 2 ways we could do this. I could click the add a table button down here to insert another table occurrence of the customer table onto the graph. One click there. Choose customer. It has to have a different name, of course. It can't be called customer. That's why the 2 is appended automatically. Or another approach that we could take, I'll cancel out of this, would just be to use the drag copy technique. On a Mac, you hold down the Option key. On a Windows machine, you hold down the Control key and just drag the table occurrence that is of the same table that you want away from itself. As long as you're holding that key when you start and end the drag, you get a nice copy of it. Or another instance of the same table, to say it a better way. I'll double click on that title bar, and I'm going to change the name to remind me why I'm creating this, this extra table occurrence of customer. We'll say same household. There. And then the relationship here is going to be between ID household and ID household, 2 foreign key fields. And if you're thinking, yikes, you told us never to do that. Well, this is not one of those relationships like these that are foundational kind of, pillars that are holding the roof up kind of a relationship. We're only creating this relationship here for the purpose of a nice special effect of being able to see on a layout the customers who happen to live in the same household as the current customer. The roof of the system is not going to come crumbling down because of this relationship. Therefore, it's okay to have what looks to be a many-to-many relationship or to use foreign key fields on both sides of the relationship. This is not something that is expressed on the entity relationship diagram, right? It's just here for what I call an icing on the cake kind of effect. All right, any questions or concerns about what we're doing here with this self-join?
No.
Okay, fantastic. We'll say okay there. And that continues on into portal setup. For some reason, it's been misbehaving and like choosing the one that I didn't choose. So I'm just going to kind of jar it loose and see if it sticks. And I can see, there we go, good. And let's say we want to put in, again, first name and last name of the people who live in the same household. Nudge this down a little bit, and let's see if it works. Okay, so here I'm on my record as a customer, and we see the other customers who are part of my family. My wife, Chris, our oldest son, Cole. Fantastic. Likewise, when I move over to the next customer, who happens to be my wife, Chris, we see the same family members or household members in the portal. Robin Smith, a single, Mark and Tamara, there we go. Now, what you probably are noticing here that we will fix before we're done is the fact that the portal is mentioning the same customer as we're looking at, which seems redundant. And indeed, I would consider it redundant as well. If we wanted this to truly show only the other household members, not including the current one, there's just a little trick that we're going to build into the relationship on which this portal is based. All right, so that's our first self-join. Next, let's say, to practice self-joins again, that we wanted to see a visit history for the animal that is currently visiting. Or in other words, while we're viewing a visit record that's obviously tagged as which animal is visiting or which animal we're treating, we also want to see in a portal all the visits by that same animal. So this is again a situation where we are starting from the context of a visit record, and we're trying to show in a portal on that layout other visit records, a self-join. In this case, the key that will connect the two is the animal ID field, a visit for, of the current animal, and then other visits by that same animal. So here we're going to do this on the visit layout. Widen this just a little bit. There we go. And start to draw the portal. Show records from. We don't have the right relationship built yet, so we'll manage the database. And here I've got visit down here. And I need to make a copy or a second instance of visit. So again, on a Mac, I'm going to hold down the Option key. On a PC, you'd hold down the Control key and just drag the original away from itself to create the copy. Visit 2 is a terrible name, so I'm going to change it, double clicking on the title bar, and let's call it visit, let's say history, or same animal, something like that. And we'll say OK. And then again, the key fields in this relationship are going to be the animal ID. So again, we're using a foreign key on one side, a foreign key on the other side. That results in FileMaker discerning that it looks to it like a many-to-many relationship, but that's okay. Again, this is just one of those icing on the cake type relationships that we're using for a special effect on a layout. Now, I'm not giving you permission to build many-to-many relationships all through your system. On the contrary, you know that's not proper. The foundational relationships, those ones that that mimic or that mirror the kinds of relationships you build on your entity relationship diagram, those need to be one-to-manys. Okay, but these, little nice touches that you add to your databases are not those kind of foundational relationships. All right, let's choose the right relationship there, and we'll say OK. And I want the date of the visit, and then the ID of the customer who came in, and the ID of the vet who treated that animal. We already know which animal it is because we're looking at the animal. We'll be able to see that animal ID here. And I'll just do a little bit of quick cleanup work. Some of these customer names are a little bit longer than others. And we'll make this into a pop-up menu that shows us our customers, and this into a pop-up menu that shows us our veterinarians. And we'll give each of those the minimal style so that they are see-through. And so now I'm on a visit record for animal number 1, and I happen to know that that's our dog Hazel. There we go, animal number 1. Okay. Yeah, I got to pull from somewhere. And so we see visits in January 2015 and October 2020 for little Hazel. All right. Again, we're seeing some redundancy, right? The current visit, the January 2015 visit, is in the portal. But later I'll show you a neat little trick that allows you to eliminate that redundancy and just show the other visits, the other records in the current table that relate to the current record. Other visits, there we go. So it seems to be working just fine. All right, so there's self-joins, where the two tables involved in the relationship are the same table. Now let's talk about cross-product joins, or a Cartesian join. This is where you want every record in table 1 to be related to every record in table 2. It's a love fest. Everybody loves everybody. But now this is obviously not your run-of-the-mill kind of relationship. These are for very special circumstances. In this case, let's say that while viewing a visit record, we want to be able to show all the services that our clinic can provide. Regardless of what problem that animal has, we just like to have at our fingertips for our vets, because they're going to be carrying this database around on their iPads in the clinic rooms. We want to let them see all the services that we can provide, which are available in a service table. So here, I want to create a portal that will show us what services do we provide. Well, first of all, let me just show you the service table. And we've got 7 records. We can do things like spay, neuter, stitch up small wounds, stitch up large wounds, and so forth. Okay, so those are the services that we can provide. Now, how do we make it so that any one visit record is considered related to all 7 of those service records? We use a cross-product join. I'll create the portal. Show records from, I don't have the right relationship yet, manage database, and we're on visit here. This is our context, right? The current layout is based on this guy here, and we want to show all the services. It doesn't really matter what fields we use for a cross-product join relationship. So I'm just going to use my primary key fields on both sides. Now, any of you who have taken our classes know that you would never do that in a traditional relationship. That just wouldn't make any sense to relate from primary key to primary key. But again, this is not one of those foundational relationships. This is for a specialty icing on the cake type of effect we're trying to create. Now I'll double click on that relationship, having joined by the 2 primary key fields, and I'll change the operator here in between from equality. We'll go past inequality and all the comparisons, less than, greater than, and so forth, to the X, which means Cartesian join or cross-product join. That's the one that I call the love fest, where every record over here is in love with every record over here and is related to it. And we'll change there. It's not an add. We're not trying to add a predicate to the relationship. We just want to redefine so that we get that cross-product effect. Notice that with cross-product relationships, you're not allowed to enable the ability to create new records via the relationship or via the portal. The X appears here to remind you that this is a cross-product join relationship as opposed to one that's based on equality, as most of them are. And we'll say OK. I'll choose that right relationship there. And actually, I'm just going to leave a vertical scroll bar off and active row off. And we'll say, show us the title and price of each of those services. There we go. I think I made it a little too narrow, so we'll stretch that out and stretch this out. And I'll make it a little taller, 7 rows instead of 6, because I know we've got 7 services that we provide. There we go. That was just a double click on the portal, which opens up the portal setup dialog. And let's see if it works. So there's our service list from any visit record. Notice how all 7 service records appear no matter what visit record we're on, because of the nature of the relationship being a Cartesian or a cross-product join. All right, any questions or concerns about that kind of a relationship? Fantastic. Well, to practice that one again, let's say that while viewing a material record, we want to be able to see all the vendors with whom we have dealings. That is, the companies we buy from. So again, material to vendor. And real quickly, I'll just hammer this one out on the material layout. In layout mode, create a portal here that will show the company name of the vendor and their phone number. Okay, so again, this is from material to vendor. We know it's going to be a cross-product join, so again, it doesn't really matter which fields we use. I could go from price to phone for that matter, and it would still behave the same way, because I'm going to double click here and change the operator to the cross-product join. Hit change, hit OK. There we go. Now, why wouldn't I use price and phone? It just seems wrong. It would just be confusing. I mean, key fields are designed for being used in relationships. We have key fields, might as well use them. And then we'll go there, and let's do that. And I'll turn that off. And we can get the title of the vendor and their phone number, so that at a glance we can easily see who we might call to supply any one of these materials. There we go. So from any from any material record, we've got an available list of all the vendors we deal with and their phone numbers. All right, moving on to our last category of relationships, multi-predicate relationships. These are relationships that are based on more than one pair of fields. They're predicated upon more than one criteria, if you will. For this first example, let's say that we are looking for customers from the same household, but we want to exclude the current customer. So we're going to go back and revisit that portal that we built earlier, where we're seeing redundantly the same customer in the portal, but I'm going to teach you how to exclude that current record, that current customer. It's an easy little trick. You'll recall that the first time we built that portal and the relationship on which it's based, we based it on household ID matching household ID. That is, Tim and Kristen and Cole are customers who all live in the same household. Therefore, they all showed up in the portal. But if we're on the Tim record and Tim's customer ID is, let's say, number 17, then we want to exclude customer number 17 from the portal. So we simply say, only include customer records that match the household ID, but that do not match the primary key, the unique identifier, right? If I'm number 17, I don't want to see number 17 in the portal as well. So you have to specify that as a criteria of what you do want to include. That is, do include customers whose ID number does not equal the current customer's ID number. Just a kind of a cool little trick that will make our portals, our self-join portals, avoid showing seemingly redundant data. So here's the portal in question. Let me go back to our record, or one of them. There we go. So we're on the Tim Jones customer record, and Tim Jones appears in the portal. We want to eliminate that or prevent that from happening. So nothing to do on the layout, rather it all has to do with the relationship. So I'll just jump into File Manage Database this way, and we're going to work on this relationship right here. Customer to customer, same household. Double clicking on it, and we're going to add in a predicate to this relationship saying, all right, if the current customer's ID number does not equal the customer record that you're looking through, because when it performs a relationship or evaluates a relationship, it's really like performing a find. In fact, I think of relationships as finds that are baked into the DNA, baked into the schema of the database. And so if we say only find and display through this portal records that meet both of these criteria, as I click the add button to add in that second predicate, find only records that meet both these criteria, that will result in customers who are in the same household, but that do not have the same ID number. When you use a not equals in a relationship, that also, like with the cross product join, disables or disallows the creation of records via the relationship. We'll say okay. Now notice the symbolism here. An X in kind of like brackets or parentheses, different than the X that represents a true cross product join here. This X does not mean cross product join. It means there are differing operators used in the predicates of the relationship between these two table occurrences. It couldn't show an equal sign, that would be lying. It couldn't show a not equal sign, that would be lying also, because some of the predicates are based on equality, some on inequality. And so that's the symbol that we get when there are multiple different operators used in the predicates of that relationship. So equality and inequality. All right, I'll go ahead and do the other one while we're at it, which was visits by the same animal, right? Where we've got, we wanted to see all the visits for the same animal, but we don't want to see the current visit. So I'll double click on the relationship here on which that other portal is based. And I'll simply throw in the same logic. Primary key cannot be equal. If they're not equal, then go ahead and include that visit record in the portal. Otherwise, if they are equal, exclude it. And we're going to use add, not change, because we're trying to add this as a second predicate to the relationship, like so. You see the keyword and over here. Multi-predicate relationships are always joined by and. There's no way to do an or predicate situation in relationships. They're always and. They always must all be true for the records on the many side to qualify and to make their way into the portal. All right, we'll say okay and okay. And look at that, I just disappeared from the portal. It's just showing Chris and Cole now. And likewise, if I jump over to Chris's record, we just see Tim and Cole. And if I were to jump over to Cole's record, we'd just see, oh, missed it. We would just see Tim and Chris. So we're successfully excluding the current customer record from that portal of other customer records. Likewise with the visits. Here, as I jump over to a visit for an animal that has, there are multiple visits. Here, poor little animal number 3 has been in 3 times. Once in April 2017, once in March 2016, once in October 2020. So it used to show all 3 visits in the portal. Now we've successfully excluded visit ID number 5 from the portal. And that's this one here. All right, volume okay? Somebody's volume cut out. I see the chat message. It keeps popping in and out for Jeff, okay. Well, I hope that's not on our end, but if I need to repeat anything, what should I repeat?
Tim, I've been able to hear the whole conversation from you.
Okay, cool. Yes, we are going to have a recording of it, and the recording I'm sure will be clean because we're just recording locally, straight from the mic and the screen, so that it should be good. I'll trim the head and tail off of the recording like last time and post it, and then I'll send you all the links just as soon as we're done. All right. Another multi-predicate relationship. In this case, let's say that we want to show upcoming visits for the current veterinarian, right? We want to show upcoming visits for the current vet. Now that means that we're relating from the vet record, or sorry, the vet table to the visit table, and that the predicates involved in that relationship are going to be the vet who's going to be on that visit, the vet who's assigned to handle that particular appointment. And then we need to factor in the date because we're trying to see only upcoming visits. And upcoming visits revolves around today's date. To do this, then, we need to have a date field in the vet table that we can relate to the date field of the visit in the visit table. And that date field needs to always be set to the current date. It needs to update daily. And we're going to show you how to do that. The way we do it is we'll define an unstored calculation field in the vet table that will use the getCurrentDate function, or in other words, that will go out and get the current date, like this. So I'm going to first jump into the vet layout. Here's where we want to see that portal of upcoming visits for any given veterinarian. We'll go into Manage Database and into Fields. And I'm going to create a field called Current Date. I'm going to prefix it with a single Z just so that it syncs to the bottom of an alphabetized list of fields. Just my naming scheme. You can see how I double Z prefix the housekeeping fields for timestamps and created by and modified by, because I just want those to be down in their own separate category or their own separate section of the list. This is going to be a calc field, not a date field, because we need it to calculate its own value. But it also needs to be what's called an unstored calculation. As I hit create, it asks me to supply the formula. It'll be the getCurrentDate function, like so, which of course will return a date. So we'll set the calculation result to date. But now here's something very interesting about calculations. And I hope that you all know this already, but if not, this will be very important, very eye-opening. Calculations do not reevaluate themselves unless they're nudged. Okay, now nudged is not the technical word. You're not going to see that in the FileMaker documentation, but here's what I mean. A calculation will not ever reassess its own value unless a value in one of the fields that it references is changed. Let me say that again. A calculation will not reevaluate its own value unless one of the fields that it references has changed. If I were writing a calculation like full name, where I was concatenating name first, ampersand space, ampersand name last, that kind of calculation would update its results if the name first value for the current record got changed or the name last value got changed. Easy enough. That makes sense. That's the way it ought to be. But what fields does this calculation reference? Yikes. None. None whatsoever. Therefore, there's nothing to nudge this zCurrentDate field to update its result. What would we get? Well, we'd get the date that was in effect when we defined the field, until you go in and do something like create a new record, and that then would force the in the vet table, and that would force this field to reevaluate itself. But that's not good enough. And so since we need this field to always reflect the current date, we're going to make it into what's called an unstored calculation. Clicking the storage options button brings up this, and we see two options. Do not store the calculation results, recalculate them when needed, okay, when needed on demand. That's great, like when another field refers to it or when a relationship refers to it and needs its value. Or we could use global storage, but sadly we can't do both. There's no such thing as an unstored global, okay? So that means that we're going to be storing the current date in, well, we're not going to be storing. That means we're going to be unstoring the current date in every record of the vet table. Okay, so since it's unstored, it's not adding size to the database, but it will cause a little bit of calculation time to be spent as this formula is evaluated or assessed. It's not going to be terribly noticeable, but you do want to be careful with unstored calculations that you don't create piles and piles of them, especially on the same layout, or that layout might take minutes to appear, to render. 1 or 2 is fine. 30 or 40, you're going to see a huge slowdown. All right, we'll say okay there. And I'm watching the chat to see if there are any questions on this concept of an unstored calc and why we needed to do it this way for this get current date function to always be up to date. Any questions? All right, thanks, Tom. Nope. Fantastic. We'll say okay here. And now we've got a field that should have today's date in it. And we can come over to the relationships graph then and continue on building that relationship between visit and vet, or vice versa, that takes into account the date. So we're trying to show any visits for the current veterinarian. So that's going to be vet ID to vet ID. There it is. But only upcoming visits. So that means that current date has to be earlier than or equal to the visit date. In other words, it has to be in the current date has to be in the past compared to the visit date. So I'll just double click on the relationship line here and create that additional predicate. There, Z current date, date, the date of the visit, and we'll say that the Z current date has to be less than or equal to, there, the visit date. And we'll add that in as a second predicate. Or if you want to think of it from the other direction, the visit date has to be greater than or equal to, in other words, after or the same as today's date. There we go. Another great example of a multi-predicate relationship. Say okay and okay again. Oh, notice the kind of the T-bar graphic that's used on the end of this. Because this is an unstored field, it can't be indexed. And any fields that can't be indexed that you try to use in a relationship are going to show that marking right there, that little T-bar kind of a marking. They're not telling you that this is broken or wrong. It's just a reminder that this is an unindexable field, a field where you can't create indexes. If you're wondering what the heck is an index, that's a subject for another day. Now, Kelly's got a message in the chat. Can you create a relationship with the date range? Absolutely, Kelly. You would need 2 date fields on one side of the relationship. So instead of just checking with current date, let's say I had a Z begin date field and a Z end date field. Then you would create yet a third predicate in the relationship that said, okay, the begin date has to be less than or equal to the event date, and the end date has to be greater than or equal to the event date. And that way it'll only show you those events, or visits in this case, that fall within the specified date range. Yeah, great question. All right, say okay and okay there. And the current date field lands on the layout. We're not going to need that, but you saw how it did appear as today's date. Get rid of that. And now we'll go and create that portal. There. Show records from. Visit. Oh, yes, it's just plain visit because I'm not using any fancy graph management strategy. I almost confused myself there because of that. Remember that the relationship that I created from vet to visit is literally the end of the relational chain there is just visit. So choosing visit here is correct. No, I don't want to delete. Yes, I want a vertical scroll. That's fine too. And we want the date of the visit and the customer who's coming in and the begin time. And we'll set that customer to a pop-up menu. From customer, change their style to minimal so we get that nice see-through look. And let's also just make that as a drop-down calendar. Okay, look at that, 2 visits scheduled for today for that vet, a couple of visits for one for today, one for tomorrow. So it looks like it's working because there are plenty of other visits in the past. Now, let's say we jump over to, let's see, we're in Ken Blackwood. He's got a visit for today. Let's say we drop that date back. Let's say we take this date, we move this visit back to the 27th instead of the 29th for veterinarian Blackwood. Now he should only show 2 visits coming up in the portal because the other one that was scheduled for the 29th now doesn't meet our criteria. So that's how you can get a portal to show a dated range. Now it'd be ideal if the records in the portal were sorted in the right order chronologically by date. And you can do that either on the portal or you can do it in the relationship. If you do it on the portal here, then you would do it with this sort portal records dialog. If you do it on the relationship, file manage database, and double click on the relationship line, and you can build in the sort right here. And I can't even believe that it's 1 o'clock already. That is ridiculous how time has flown by. All right, so there we go, and there we go. And now those records will appear in sorted order by visit date and time. We've run out of time for our filtered value lists. I'll keep going. If any of you want to stay on, you are, of course, more than welcome to. Kelly has another question in the chat. Can you relate a calculated field in one table to a field in another table? So the question is, can calc fields be used in relationship, I think, right? It depends. If it's an unstored calc, it may not be able to be used. And it kind of depends on which side of the relationship it is, it's on too. If it needs to be indexable, then the calculation could not be an unstored calculation. So that's a tough question to answer, Kelly, because there are too many variables that it depends on. All right. Tom asks, is it preferable to filter via the portal or the relationship? The difference in behavior is this: if you apply the sorting, if you apply the filtering on the relationship, then it affects every portal that's based on that relationship. Now, if you only have one portal based on that relationship and you only ever plan to have the one portal, then it's a non-issue. You can do it either way. But the reason I always build my filters on the relationship rather than the portal is because if you are going to use a calculation field on the one side of the relationship, let's say to count, right? Let's say you wanted to have a count of how many visits any veterinarian has coming up. You would want to put the filtering in the relationship rather than in portal filtering, because your count calculation would be based on the relationship and not on the portal filtering. You could, through the relationship, you could, cause it to show a couple of records and get a proper count. But if you held that filtering back from the portal, if you held that filtering back from the relationship, you didn't put it there, but rather built it onto the portal, then that count calculation or sum or whatever aggregate calculation you're using up there in the manage database dialog box would be pointing down the relationship chain. The filtering then being at the portal level would not be factored into your count or sum. So I know lots of folks in the FileMaker community who will only ever apply their filtering at the relationship level because of that pretty serious thing. You could use execute SQL, absolutely, Tom mentions. So there's almost always more than one way to tell a story. Very good. All right, let's get on to our last technique, and that is the filtered value list. So if we were on the visit layout, and we were taking appointments, and we asked the customer, okay, who is this who's calling? Okay, good, we've got you in our database. We'll schedule a visit for you. We fill in the right customer ID. And then when we go to fill in the right animal ID, let's say we want the pop-up menu to show only the animals that could belong to that customer, only the animals that belong to the same household that customer belongs to. So to set the pop-up menu to be filtered to only show a certain subset of the animal records rather than showing all the animal records. And here's how we do that. So to get us into the right context, we're on a visit record. Let me jump over to some of these last ones where the ID of the animal has not yet been entered. And we want a pop-up menu here, or a value list that's going to only show the animals for Tamara Buchanan's household or for Tracy Jones's household and so on. So file managed value list, no, sorry, file managed database. Let's build the relationship first. And we're on visit. This is where we're starting. And a visit is related to an animal. So we'll go here like that. You think, wait a minute, can't we go straight from visit to household? No, we can't. There's no key field there that would realistically join to animal. We go ID animal to ID of the animal. And then we've already got from ID animal, or sorry, from ID household in animal to ID household, and likewise to customer. Okay, so I think I did that wrong. Let's back that up. Let me get my head on straight here. And it's for customer that we want to do this. We want to say, all right, this visit is for customer number such and such. There, that's the relationship that we needed to create. We know the customer who's calling to schedule a visit. We've entered their ID number here. That visit belongs to that customer. That customer is part of a household, and that household has animals in it. That's the relational chain. Are you starting to get a sense why graph management strategies now are so important? Look at all these crisscrosses. This is a wreck. This is a mess. So next session in 2 weeks, we'll talk about graph management strategies and why they're so important. But there's the relationship that was needed for this. Then finally, to build the value list, we'll create this value list of animals in household by visit or something like that. Use values from field. We know we want to be able to choose an animal. That's the end goal of this pop-up menu, this value list. And so we'll specify animal as the ending of it, and we'll see the animal's name to help us choose the right ID number. But then we don't want to include all values for this animal value list. We want to only include those starting from a certain table occurrence on the graph. And we're going to start it from visit, right? Starting from visit, that will go through customer to household to animal, the chain, the relational chain that I just showed you on the graph. And we'll say that and okay and okay. And now if we go into our layout and assign a pop-up menu behavior to that field with the new value list, and that should be good. And so now we can easily assign an animal to a visit, right? Tamara Buchanan has one animal, Sammy the bird, whereas Tracy Jones, they have 3 animals, Flurb, Georgia, and Thomas O'Malley. There we go. So that's a filtered value list that makes it much easier to choose because you're looking at only a subset of the actual records in that animal table. And another really important use for relationships, somewhat complex relationships. All right, and there's the chain that relationship followed. Finally, I know I've blown way through our time, but if you do have any questions, I'd be happy to stick around. Thank you all, by the way, for sticking around. I love it. This is fun.
Thank you. I needed that, Tim.
Oh, you're most welcome. My pleasure.
And I'm going to need to think about that last part a little bit.
All right. Well, I'll send out the link to the recording so you'll have it for forever.
Thank you.
My pleasure. If there aren't any questions, then by all means, have a great rest of your day, everybody. Thank you so much for joining. It's been a delight. I'm sorry that I took so much of the time. I'm going to work on restricting my lesson portion to less than half the sessions.